What if I tell you the biggest problem with the US Iran deal is not what is written inside it, but what is not written clearly? Because right now, this deal is being presented as a major diplomatic breakthrough. The war is supposed to stop, the Strait of Hormuz is supposed to reopen. Oil markets may calm down, Iran may get economic incentives, and Trump can say, I ended the war. But here is the real question. Did this deal actually solve the nuclear problem? Or did it simply push the hardest question 60 days into the future? And honestly, this is where the whole agreement becomes interesting. Because if the war was justified by saying Iran must not get a nuclear weapon, then the final deal should clearly answer some very basic questions. What happens to Iran's enriched uranium? What happens to its centrifuges? Will enrichment stop completely or only be capped? Will inspectors get full access? And most importantly, what happens if Iran violates the deal? From what we know so far, the agreement seems much cleaner about calming the crisis than actually solving the nuclear issue. So, my first point is this deal may be useful, but it is not yet a victory. It is useful because war needs an exit. The Strait of Hormuz is not a small issue. If that route remains unstable, global oil supply, energy prices, shipping, and inflation can be affected. So, yes, reopening Hormuz and reducing military escalations matter. But if we go one level deeper, this deal looks like a final peace agreement and more like a pressure release mechanism. Basically, it is saying, let us stop the immediate fire first and discuss the nuclear issue later. Now, that sounds practical, but politically, it creates a big credibility problem. Because Trump and his team are trying to present this as a tough agreement, they are saying Iran will only get benefits if it complies. On paper, that sounds logical, but the question is who decides compliance? What proof is required? What is the timeline? And what is the punishment if Iran delays? If these details are not clearly written, then performance based becomes a slogan, not a system. And this brings me to the biggest red flag the role of invisible commitments. US officials are basically saying do not just look at the public text. Iran has made private commitments also. Now, in diplomacy, back channel promises are normal. Countries often use vague languages because both sides needs to save face. But when you are dealing with nuclear materials, sanctions, war, and regional security, vague languages can become dangerous. Because tomorrow the US can say, Iran privately promised this. Iran can say, no, we never agreed to that. And then both sides can accuse each other of betrayal. This is why I feel the biggest weakness of this deal is not that it is temporary. Interim deals can work. The real weakness is that the most sensitive obligation may not be publicly clear. Now let's talk about the $300 billion fund. At first glance, this number sounds massive. It sounds like Iran is being offered a huge economic package. But we need to be careful here. This is not necessarily money sitting in a bank account waiting to be transferred. It is not automatically US taxpayers' money. It is being described as a private sector investment fund and it would become active only after a final satisfactory deal. So, in simple words, the 300 billion fund is not the deal. It is the bait designed to make the final deal possible. And this is actually a smart diplomatic design. For Iran, it gives a face saving economic prize. Tehran can go to its people and say, we resisted and now investment is coming. For Trump, it gives a political selling point. We are not giving Iran taxpayer money, we are using private investment as leverage. But again, the problem is implemented. Private companies will not invest in Iran just because a document says so. They will need sanctions clarity, banking access, legal protection, insurance, security guarantees, and confidence that the deal will not collapse after 6 months. So the fund sounds powerful, but right now it is more of a promise than a guarantee. And this is where sequencing becomes very important. A good deal would follow a strict order first inspection, then verification, then nuclear limits, then phased economic benefits. But if Iran receives early oil access, financial relief, or diplomatic normalization before giving major nuclear concessions, critics will say Iran got rewarded for escalation. And this is exactly where US domestic politics becomes a problem. Congress will ask what exactly did Iran give up? Israel will ask, is Iran's nuclear capability actually reduced? Conservative hawks will ask, is this just another Iran deal but with less transparency? And Democrats may ask, why was the Congress kept in the dark? So Trump may have stopped one crisis, but he has opened another political battle at home. Now let's talk about Iran's side because this is equally important. Iran cannot publicly say we compromised because we were under pressure. That would look like weakness. The Islamic Republic has built much of its identity around resistance of America. Tehran has presented its deal as victory. Their message is basically we survived the war, we kept our dignity, the US had to negotiate, and now economic doors may open. But survival is not the same as victory. If Iran eventually accepts tougher inspection, enrichment limits, restriction around Hormuz, or conditions linked to sanctions relief, then the victory narrative becomes more symbolic than real. Still, politically, Iran needs that narrative. Besides, ordinary Iranians are not only thinking about ideology, they are thinking about prices, jobs, currency, fear of war, and daily survival. If this deal brings visible relief, the regime can say resistance worked. But if the deal becomes another empty promise, then both hardliners and ordinary citizens may turn against it. And this is why the agreement is fragile from both sides. The US needs to sell it as a tough deal, Iran needs to sell it as a dignified deal, Israel needs to see it as a secure deal, investors need to see it as a stable deal. This is a lot of expectation from one vague agreement. And we have not even fully included the regional problems yet. Iran's nuclear program is one issue, but Iran's missiles, Hezbollah, Lebanon, regional militants, and Israel's military strategy are separate issues. If these are not included, Israel and pro Israel landmarks may say the deal is incomplete, but if these issues are included at once, then the deal may become impossible to negotiate. So there is a real dilemma here. A narrow deal is easier to sign but strategically incomplete. A broader deal is more complete but politically almost impossible. This is why I think the best way to understand this argument is this: it is not peace, it is not surrender, it is not victory. It is a temporary bridge, and the next 60 days will decide whether that bridge leads to a real settlement or collapses under its own contradictions. My final view is this deal is not simply bad because it is temporary. A temporary pause can save lives, stabilize oil routes, and create diplomatic space. But it becomes dangerous if leaders sell it as a final nuclear victory before the nuclear terms are actually secured. Because the real test is not the signing ceremony, the real test is verification. Will Iran clearly limit enrichment? Will its stockpiles be neutralized? Will centrifuges be dismantled or monitored? Will inspectors get meaningful access? Will sanctions relief be reversible? Will Israel accept the security guarantees? Will Congress accept the process? Until these questions are answered, this agreement should be seen as a pause button, not a solution. So, in one line, the US Iran deal may be good enough to stop a war, but it is not yet strong enough to guarantee peace.